I get nervous on a stage, and so I take a deep breath and imagine everyone in the audience is naked. You guys look great. I'm a geek. I'm from Denmark. Denmark is a small country in the north of Europe, which, by the way, is completely different from Germany. Thank you. I like to work on big, ambitious things, and frankly, most things I work on fail, sometimes quite spectacularly. But there is one exception to this rule. 10 years ago, my brother and I started the project that became Google Maps, and I'd like to share with you the story of how that happened. Because you see, Google Maps, which is by far my biggest professional success, started with my brother and I getting laid off. We got fired in the midst of an enormous financial crisis, much like what's going on in the world today. And I don't think that's a coincidence, you'll see from my story. The story begins actually really quickly, a show of hands. Who here has used Google Maps? Oh, yes. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. You guys are a great audience. Thank you. This is the NASDAQ, one of America's two main stock indices. It tracks in particular technology shares. This is from the past decade. You'll see here is the effect of the 2008 economic crises. This, though, is not really a stock crash. This is a stock crash. I graduated in California in 1998 at a time when everyone was building a high-tech startup. It was like a gold rush. The professor down the hall from me started a company, hired me, hired my brother. We raised $45 million, and we spent every single penny of it without ever selling a product. And yet, we were convinced we were going to be rich. And then we got laid off. This was painful, being laid off. It turned out to be quite a blessing in disguise, although a really good disguise, I can assure you. Why? Because no one was hiring at the time. Companies were dying left, right, and center, so we might as well do our own thing. And my brother, who was the ideas man, he identified mapping as an area where a small team could have a big impact. At the time, there were lots of map sites around. They had not changed a lot, though, in 5 years, and my brother wrote down a short list of maybe 3 things that he believed we could do much better. And so we set out to build a prototype. There was just this one little problem. We were broke. Why? Well, remember, we were going to be rich, so we hadn't exactly saved up a lot of money. And so I moved into a room in a shared house. I signed up for unemployment insurance. I did a couple of contracting gigs in the next year. My brother moved back to Denmark, actually moved back in with mom. He hates it when I tell that part of the story. By the way, my mother came all the way from Denmark. She is I know what you're all thinking. You're thinking, did he also imagine his mom naked? So we set out to build a prototype, and 6 months later, we had a bare bones thing ready. And then we went and crashed a panel discussion. It was actually about how sucky the economy was at the time. Because there was this one guy there, Frank Marshall, that had been on the board of the company that fired us 6 months earlier. We thought if he remembers us, we'll get him to introduce us to lots of investors. And he did actually remember us. And every single person we spoke to since then, including Larry Page, one of the founders of Google, we could trace back to an introduction from this just one guy. Frank sent us to pitch our idea to 5 different venture capital companies in California. Each of them gave us 1 hour. None of them called us back. No one was interested in investing. These were really difficult times to find investments. I think of that time as riding a giant roller coaster. And to be perfectly honest, it was really tempting to just give the whole thing up at this point. However, I would like to say that I have steel in my belly, like this favorite frog of mine here. The truth is that no one was hiring at the time. So what else were we going to do than press on? We had tried to get friends involved in California, but everyone kept telling us, look, you're crazy, you can't make money from maps. We're not going to join you. And so it was just Jens and me, except I had these two friends in Australia, of all places, who were keen to get involved. And so Jens and I bought the cheapest airline tickets we could find. We met up in Sydney, Australia. We set up a small office in my friend's spare bedroom. We built a few more computers from the cheapest components we could find, and we spent another 6 months now in Sydney, Australia, which is a beautiful place, much like Athens, building out our ideas. I flew back to California. We called up Frank again. We said, look, we've got something better now. And he sent us to 5 new venture capital funds. And we got 1 hour from each of them. This time, however, the last one took the bait. It was called Sequoia Capital. They were at the time, and still is, one of the biggest investment firms in California. They'd been behind Cisco, Apple, Yahoo, Google. This was really exciting for us. They offered us $2 million in return for 40% of the company, which by today's standards in Silicon Valley is a terrible, terrible deal. At the time, it felt like a miracle delivered by the archangel himself. We led the spread throughout the investment community that Sequoia was going to invest, and 4 or 5 other investors quickly lined up to co-invest. These were really good times for us. We spent maybe 3 weeks negotiating the exact terms, and then came the wonderful day when we were going to go sign the deal. Unfortunately, that morning, Yahoo launched a significant improvement to their map site, which was one of the biggest at the time. It was nothing like what we were suggesting, but still it was kind of worrying. And sure enough, phone rings, it's Sequoia. Lars, we got to talk, man. And the deal was over. It was dead. They changed their mind. And within a few hours, all of the other investors had heard, and they also ditched us. No one was going to talk to us again, ever. And I mean, fuck, that hurt. But here's our friend the frog. I called Mom actually in tears. Oh, no one loves us. And Mom says, son, there is something better waiting for you. That's how good Mom is. So we took 3 days to recover. And we called up the 3 people who had been the most excited about our technology. And one of them, his name was Ram Shriram, he had this incredible insight. He said, look, the same reason that Sequoia no longer wants to invest is going to make Google want to buy you. Because at the time, Google and Yahoo were big competitors, and Google didn't have a mapping site. So he said, look, they saw what Yahoo did as well, and if they buy you guys, they have a chance at actually leapfrogging Yahoo in this area. And so Ram conveniently sat on Google's board. He was a good personal friend of Larry Page, one of the founders of Google. And within 2 days, we were talking to Larry, showing him our maps. And the rest, as they say, is history. A few months later, Google bought our company. It wasn't for a lot of money, mind you. They knew, of course, that we were broke and desperate and had absolutely no other option in life. We did fine financially, but the most important thing is, though, that last month, 1 billion people used Google Maps, which is just crazy. In fact, as I'm telling you this story now, thank you. Thank you. In fact, as I'm telling you this story now, I can't believe this actually happened, but it did. And so in 2007, my brother and I left the Maps team, and as you can imagine, our confidence was like sky high. And we persuaded Google to invest $25 million in a team of 60 engineers to build our next thing called Google Wave. We worked on it for almost 3 years. We launched it in 2009, to quite a lot of excitement, and in 2010, the whole thing came crashing down, became the most painful and spectacular failure of my life. And so I hope you can see the pattern here. $45 million in the middle of a gold rush, failure. Yeah, no engineers, no money in the middle of a crisis. Became a success. $25 million, 60 engineers, shipwreck. The point I'm trying to make is that right here and right now in Athens, 2012, in the middle of a pretty scary crisis, is in fact probably the best time to start a high-tech company if you have what that takes. Sergey Brin put it like this: scarcity breeds clarity. What I mean is that just like in California in 2002, there's tremendous talent here. I mean, just look at yourself, all naked and shiny. But no one is hiring. And that leads people to be more creative, more willing to take risk. You might say desperate, that's fine. Makes people willing to work for shares instead of money. And you guys have this one great advantage over Jens and I back in 2002. Lyfta I parkour. Thank you. I mean, of course, among high-tech investors. So in year 2012, there's lots more money being invested in new companies than in 2002, not just from venture capital firms, but also from what we call angel investors, just individuals who get together, 10 or 20 of them, to invest between $500,000, $1 million, $1.5 million, typically in very small teams that take advantage of all of the advances in mobile computing, in cloud computing, and web computing. And it turns out that a small team with a small investment can actually make an enormous difference in the world. As you heard before, I work for that startup called Facebook. I work actually on a really exciting thing, which unfortunately I'm not allowed to tell you about. I apologize. Don't try and get me drunk afterwards. It won't work. But in my spare time, I advise a small number of very early high-tech startups because I am willing to work for shares and no money. These 4 companies are all outside of Silicon Valley, but they're all funded by money that comes from inside Silicon Valley. 2 of them are in Sydney, Australia, 1 is in Berlin, Germany, and 1 of them is in Las Vegas. What they all have in common is that they address a global market. They don't care where they are, and investors don't either. There is an increasing appetite among investors in California and investing outside of California. One of the big reasons, by the way, is that American immigration policy makes it really hard for high-tech workers to come into California, despite the fact that 25% of companies in California are started by foreigners. It takes more than a year before you can get a visa, which is great if you happen to be in Athens and want to hire engineers locally. You don't, by the way, need to be a techie like me to start a company like this. These 3 companies, 1 is started by a music promoter, 1 is started by an artist, 1 is started by a graphics designer, and only 1 of them is started by a geek like me. What you want to do is try and solve a problem that you have yourself and you have a lot of passion for. Of course, it has to be a problem that lots of people all around the world also has, and your solution has to be one that no one has tried before. As we heard earlier, I got into mapping because I have no sense of direction whatsoever. In fact, I need a map to find my own bathroom, and I don't live in a big house. And so then, there's a saying in California that software eats everything, meaning that every industry is ready to be disrupted by software, and it shouldn't matter where you are. What matters is what idea you have and how well you present yourself to investors. In fact, I could imagine, I'm not here totally by coincidence. I visited Athens many times, and I'm in love with your country for a great many reasons, and I could see myself, once Facebook gets tired of me, moving here and trying to prove the point I was making earlier, that this place right now is actually a wonderful place to start a company. Thank you. And so just to sum it up, the points I'm trying to make here is that crises, although obviously they're terrifying and scary and you want to avoid them at all costs, when you find yourself in the middle of one, use them to inspire yourself to be more creative. Just like my brother and I did, there are lots of examples of this kind of success that comes out of a crisis. And keep in mind that abundance, I've tried it, although it feels wonderful in the beginning, it doesn't necessarily lead to success. And then more than anything, remember that technology is global. It doesn't matter where you are, you can address the entire world as a marketplace from anywhere in the world, and you can find investors from anywhere in the world to build your company. And lastly, I want you to remember this guy here. I have him hanging on my wall, and he comes in hand very helpfully. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.